Boston, Crockett's Victory Garden.
Welcome to Crockett's Victory Garden. I'm Jim Crockett. I'm doing some midsummer pruning on the silver fleece vine, which I planted here early this spring. And you can see how this vine is trying to grow right up over the top of the greenhouse. Now this plant doesn't begin to blossom until September. What I want to do is to shorten these long growths and get some new growth about this size upon which the flowers will be born. And this will be a magnificent, just a bower of small white blossoms come September. Well, I'm going to save these cuttings because we can root these. We'll have even more plants. Well, let me tell you today, this is a silver fleece vine, grows in most parts of the country. Very, very good plant to have. Maybe you'll try one next year. Today, we're going to pick the first of our sweet corn. We're going to pick the first peppers. And I have a non-chemical control for that dreaded cabbage root maggot. The first thing I want to talk about is another insect called the squash vine borer. And we have the squash plants right over in here. And the method that I'm going to use is to show you a way of getting at these things before the borer gets to you. First, let's review how a squash vine grows. It comes from the center of the plant and sends out these long runners which creep across the ground. And normally, they root at every leaf. And you can see a little root started right here and right here. Well, the squash vine borer attacks in this part of the plant, depositing an egg which grows into a borer and goes on down the cane. And we'll go out one day in midsummer and this whole vine has died or wilted right back. Well, you can dig out the borer. What I'm looking for you to do, however, is to get some of this material called rotenone. This is a natural material, non-chemical, works beautifully for this type of an insect, and spray the first 4 feet from the base of the plant about once a week for 3 or 4 weeks. Chances are you won't have any trouble with a borer whatsoever. Now let's go down and we will come to another type of squash. And this is the one which is the summer squash or the zucchini. You've heard of that one, I'm sure, perhaps grown it. Before I get to the fruit, I want you to observe the foliage. Now you see some varieties which are perfectly green foliage. And then we have one here, the foliage is mottled with silver. And you might very well think that there's something wrong with that. It's perfectly healthy, so don't be upset if some of your plants have leaves which are green and some that are not. But what I really wanted to talk to you about are the zucchinis themselves. And I purposely left this fruit on the vine and cut this open a few minutes ago to show you how not to do it. I don't like zucchinis to get this big because they're tough on the inside. Now, you might like to bake them and stuff them, but really, if you want good zucchinis, what I think are good, get them when they're like this, about 6 or 8 inches long, just as tender as can be. This is the kind which you can eat raw. It's nearly as good or better, some people say, than even cooking it. So I guess the most important thing I can tell you about zucchinis, other than picking them of this size, is to continue picking them. Don't let them get big and leave them on the vine, because these seeds you see will have formed. The plant says to itself, well, I've completed my life's mission, I have progeny coming up, there's no need for me to make more fruit. Keep them picked and they'll continue to produce fruit all summer long. And if you can't give the zucchinis away, pick them anyway, recycle them in your compost pile. Now let's go and talk about cabbages, and especially that cabbage root maggot. Now last week we had a very interesting visitor here from England, Peter Seabrook, who has a gardening program on BBC. And we were discussing this terrible insect which lays eggs right here at the base of the cabbage plant, develops into little white maggots that go down into the root and kill the plants off. Well, this is a European insect, so they're pretty well familiar with them in Great Britain. And he said, instead of insecticides, a lot of people are making a physical barrier So those flies can't lay the eggs which develop into the maggots. By the way, the flies look like common house flies, only just about half the size. Well, he takes a piece of material such as this, which happens to be very thin indoor-outdoor carpeting, and you see he cuts it down to the center and drills a hole in the center about 1/4 of an inch in diameter. And you can see that's sort of filled in by the fuzz of the carpeting, but a very, very tiny hole, because if we make a big hole, the fly can get in and do his job. So what we do here is to make a small one, and as the plant grows, it will spread this thing apart and it won't hold its growth back. But let's begin. We'll just plant this little cabbage seedling just as we would ordinarily. There we go. So the next thing is, I want to make that soil very, very level, because when I put the barrier around, there can't be a place for the bug to get in underneath. I'll give this a little drink of water with some nutrients mixed in with it, a water-soluble fertilizer. And we'll take this piece of material and actually slip it right in close to the stem of the plant, just like that. We want that to lie down flat. I'm taking a piece of black masking tape here and actually sealing this joint. I don't want any way for that fly to get in here to lay her eggs. Because I have an abundance of rocks in my garden, I actually go out here and drop a pebble on each corner. Will hold that down. Now we're going to plant some more cabbages in this row without treating them. In England, they find that they can save perhaps 80 to 85% of their plants this way, and if they do nothing, they'll lose about 80% of their plants. So this is something worth trying instead of a chemical. Now let's go over and we'll talk about another vegetable called the okra. A lot of my friends in the north have never grown okra, and yet in the southern part of the country, this is one of the really great vegetables. I want to again show you when to harvest and when not to. Now here is one which is too large. Cut this one off. This is really woody. The seeds on the inside of this are, see how large they are? And this is just as tough and woody as can be. I'll go back over to this plant and harvest one at the proper stage. Even the stem on that, as I cut through it, shows how tender it was. Just as delicate as can be. See how much smaller the pod is and how much smaller the seeds are. This is the kind of a one, when you get okra of this, at this stage of development, you get the good ones. Again, it's my old theory of having your own garden. If you can't get some of the superior quality vegetables, what's the use of doing it all? So you get some good ones this way. I'm going to cross over to the peppers, but I did want you to just take a glance at my California poppies coming in here. They'll blossom all summer long. We'll get over here and pick one of the peppers. Now, this is an early variety called Earliest Red Sweet. There we are. Earliest Red Sweet, a very nice pepper, which turns scarlet, just as though it had been covered with Chinese lacquer when it's ripe. Very nice variety. But this is not, again, I should say, this is not a matter of picking them when they're big, because peppers have the same flavor at all stages of their development. So if you have an abundance of them in your garden, you can start to pick them while they're small. The chief thing I wanted to show you on the pepper plant, however, was really not the pepper, but this business right down here. I had a little rain on these leaves, and so you see some water on them, but if you look closely, you'll see all of these little brown sections on the leaves. About 3 weeks ago, the Boston Weather Bureau was saying that we had a day the air very much polluted, very close to a smog alert. Well, what I'm convinced is that this smog particles landed on the pepper foliage. I noticed it also on the hollyhocks. All of the foliage which has developed since that time is perfectly clean. So we know that this was a one-shot thing, nothing you can really do about it. But when you see something like this in your garden, think through, I know there are no bugs here. You can see there's no evidence of an insect whatsoever. So you've found out what the real problem is, and you're not to be alarmed by it. Now this pepper, as I said, will turn bright red, and we have another bright red vegetable to pick over here. We're going to harvest some tomatoes. Okay, now this is a variety called Early Girl. These aren't the largest fruit that this variety can produce, but they're nice ones. Now, I want to make a point to you right here and now about tomatoes. Now you can see the crack on the top of that fruit. If you buy so-called ripe tomatoes in a supermarket, those tomatoes actually will have been picked while they were green, and they've been ripened under artificial conditions. Not like this on the vine, because they would be too tender to handle. If you look over on the vine itself, you'll see that all the green fruit is without blemish. There are no cracks on this. It's only as the fruit gets up to this stage, we get a rain and a sunshine, and this will cause some of this cracking. You can avoid it to a certain extent by keeping the soil evenly moist at all times. That's the variety called Early Girl. Then we have a mid-season variety. You can see that big whopper down on the bottom. This is called Jet Star. The one above it isn't quite as large, but now that one is ready to harvest. A beautiful fruit, no blemish, not a blemish on it. This is Jet Star, a good mid-season variety. Now notice that this was grown on a stake and we have ripe fruit. The plant right beside me here, this great big one, is the very same variety, grown in a cage, a lot of fruit on it underneath all of that foliage, but none of that fruit is ripe yet. Well, if we're making up the ingredients for salad, let's go right back here to the cucumbers, because it's time to pick them. The variety that I'm going to harvest now is one called Sweet Slice. It's a new one to me this year, but it's a nice one. You see, it still has that little dried up flower at the end of it. This cucumber has grown so rapidly that I know, again, this is tender enough that you could eat the skin as well as the flesh on the inside. I want to have a very special word with you about cucumbers so that you'll follow this method of culture. Cucumbers are climbing vines. See the tendrils themselves that curl round and round, any kind of a support that they can find. For years, gardeners have allowed these to sprawl on the ground. Then they've had fruit that was yellow on the bottom or misshapen. When you grow them like this, not only do you use a very small piece of your garden, but you get perfectly beautiful fruit. One other thing to think about at this stage, about the time that you picked your first cucumber, bear in mind that these plants will not produce fruit indefinitely. For a couple of months, they'll do very, very well. Then you begin to get those little nubbins with a little thing on the end of them, rather bitter. That's when we get all the questions, why are my cucumbers bitter? They just sort of run out. So right now, when the first one is picked, I'm going to sow some seeds of a second crop of cucumbers. In this instance, I've fixed some peat pots. These are 3-inch peat pots. I've used my sifter here to sift some of my pure compost, just like that, and fill these follows up. And this time I'm going to grow burpless hybrid. Can grow any variety of cucumbers that you'd want to. We'll simply put a couple of seeds on each one of these pots, like that. Press them into the ground about a ½ inch deep. Now, I don't want to wash those out of the ground, so I'm going to set them here in this little tray of water. Now, here's some that I planted earlier. You see how the moisture is coming up through here. I like to keep this is perfectly saturated now. It's ready to set aside and drain a little bit, but we must keep the soil moist until the germination occurs. Now, in about 2 weeks, this plant will be 3 or 4 inches tall, And we'll go over to a section of the garden where the sweet peas are beginning to run out, and I'll simply plant these young cucumber vines in there, and we'll have cucumbers right up until frost. Well, let's talk about some flowers for a minute. The first one I want to talk about back in here is the baby's breath, the variety known as Bristol Fairy. Been on the market for many, many years, but what a delightful flower it is in the garden like this, a perennial, lives year after year, nice for cutting. And in behind it, we have one of the garden phlox. The name is American Legion. Very, very nice color. And way in the front, I have this beautiful plant of dill. Now, the seed pods are beginning to occur on the dill. Some you see are a little bit more advanced than the others. This was getting brown. This one is still green. Now, if you want to make dill pickles, this is the stage to get them. Perfectly great. And I want to say this about the dill plant, just as an ornamental. You know, if I never used the dill, if I had no use for it in a culinary manner, I would grow it just for its good looks. A handsome, handsome annual. By the way, on dill, you shouldn't be satisfied with one planting. Keep planting it every 2 or 3 weeks during the summer so that you can always have some fresh dill foliage to go with some of your dishes, such as potato salad. I have another flower I'd like you to look at in here, which is new this year. This is a type of hollyhock called majorette. About 30 inches tall, comes in many colors. You know, the flower looks as though it might have been made out of crepe paper, delicately cut and fringed on the corners. I see the bees like it here too. Delightful cut flower, something new in the hollyhock line from seeds sown this spring. And in behind it is that magnificent white garden phlox called White Admiral. I can find no fault with a plant like that, one which will live for years in the garden, produce crops of this year after year after year. Now let's go from flowers now, and we'll start talking about eggplants. I don't know if you realize it, but there are more people in the world who grow eggplants, I guess, than any other vegetable. Especially in the Middle East, a great many gardeners have eggplants. And I want to show you that our plant is beginning to produce some fruit. But that's really not my purpose to show you that it's growing fruit, because we expect that. What I want to show you is these yellow leaves. Now, this yellowing and browning of the foliage is caused by a very insidious wilt known as verticillium wilt. It lives in the soil for at least 15 years. It attacks at least 300 different kinds of plants, all the way from elm trees to eggplants, as you see here. And there isn't much that you can do about it, except to rotate your crop. Now, a friend of mine has a garden this year where there has never been a garden before, and his eggplants are marvelous. Give him 2 or 3 years of planting eggplants in that same garden, along with related plants such as tomatoes and peppers, and I'll bet he'll have verticillium wilt. Now, what the professionals do is to spend enough money and effort to fumigate the soil. Well, that's really beyond the ken of most of the home gardeners, but it will cure it. And otherwise, rotate your crop. This probably won't kill the plant, but it does cut down on the production. Now we come to the fun part of the program. Get over here and harvest some of this sweet corn. And I want to begin right back at this first ear of corn, which I showed you last week. At that time, this silk was still green, or partially green. Now it's perfectly ripe. And I'm going to pick that one, and we'll see what else there's a few others that we'll pick also. But before I pick it, I want to go into some of the background of the corn. If you look across this bed, you'll see, just in one quick glance, how the varieties differ. You can see, if you look closely, 5 different varieties across there, increasingly tall and at different stages of development. This is very, very important that you plant a lot of corn at one time, a lot of corn of different varieties, so that regardless of what the seed catalog might say about its date of maturity, it will nevertheless mature in sequence. Now this particular one is called Butter V. The catalog says that this is ready for picking 58 days after harvesting. Well, I'll let you know that I planted this corn 84 days ago, not 58 days ago. When they say 58 days, I'm sure that it has to be in a more salubrious climate than we have here and under the very best growing conditions. But let's get to the corn itself. I'm going to pick some of these. I'm going to husk them open. And I guess you see that what I have to say about this corn is this, that I certainly haven't picked it ahead of time. I haven't skinned it down to look at it. So what you're going to see is maybe a surprise package for me. But let's just see what we have. All right, this gives you an idea of what the corn looks like. This is Butter V. Greg, on the camera, how about taking a good look at that one, because this may not be the sweetest sweet corn of the year because it's the earliest, but the cob is about 9 inches long and perfectly filled out, which comes from having grown the corn in blocks. Because you know, you heard me say that corn is pollinized by the wind, and if you grow the plants in blocks, you do get good pollination. Well, this program is going to be a little bit different. I'm actually going to put this corn right here into a dish. At the end of this program, we're going to start eating some of it. We'll let that cook for 6 or 7 minutes. That's all it's going to take. But what I want to talk to you about now is poinsettias and how we're going to propagate them. Now, I'll bet that you have somewhere around your house a poinsettia plant left over from last Christmas. It may even have some of the foliage, which is red, as you see here. The plant itself is beginning to get rather straggly. Here it is 30 inches tall, perhaps, and one-sided, pretty gawky-looking plant. Now, there are two ways of saving this plant, and the first one is this. I'm going to take some cuttings from the top of this and root them. And the first secret is to take cuttings that have about 4 mature leaves. Don't count these little fellows here in the center. We'll count 1, 2, 3, 4 leaves, and we'll cut right down at this point. First thing that happens, if you go right back here, is that this white latex comes out. I want to caution you not to get that kind of stuff in your eye because it could be very irritating. Also, since we're getting ready to root this, and you have seen me dip other cuttings in moisture first before putting in a rooting compound, I'm going to advise you, don't put your poinsettia cuttings in water because this dilutes this sap, which will coagulate if you allow it to stay at its full strength. Instead, I'm going to reach right over here and dip this directly in rooting powder. And again, we're going to put it in a material called perlite. Now that material is damp. It's already wet. We're going to put this in, save all the leaves, firm down around it quite well. I like to use perlite because it allows a good deal of air to get in around that cutting, which does help the rooting process to take place. Notice now that I am not watering it, because watering this will help to wash off some of the compound, and it will keep it from rooting. I'm going to give it its own little greenhouse. One of the things about a poinsettia is it tends to wilt very quickly unless it has a humid condition. Now, we're going to put this in a brightly lighted place, fairly warm at this time of year. Any place is warm enough for it. In about 2 or 3 weeks, we'll begin to have some roots on the bottom. We'll transplant this into regular potting soil, and it'll begin to grow. Well, let's start again with this old plant. I'll show you what we can do here to rejuvenate it and start it over again. Now, I'm going to give it rather severe pruning. I'm going to cut this way back here just above one of these little joints, which you see on the stems. Cut that one there. This one I'm going to cut right there. That one like that. Now that doesn't look very promising, but let me show you what happens with a plant like this after about a month. Now here you see a plant which was cut back in that manner. This will make a pretty nice plant by Christmas time. But go back again to this one. This heavy ball of soil, all those roots. We're going to give this one a larger pot and some fresh soil around it. Set it aside. In a very short time, this will begin to make new growth, and we'll have a handsome plant. Now, I'm coming back to poinsettias time and time again, so we'll get back to how to make them flower. But right now, I want to get to some questions. The very first question I have goes back to some questions we've gotten in this week. Last week, I said, how you can put a paper bag over your ears of corn to keep the squirrels and birds away. Well, people have written in to me to say, oh, it's not those squirrels and birds, it's the raccoons that bother me. Well, I tell you what I do about it. I bought one of these animal traps called Have a Heart trap. Now, this cages the animal without hurting it in any manner. And after the raccoon gets in the trap, you go out the next morning, put him in the trunk of your car, and take him up to the countryside for a good long ride. Chances are he'll find somebody else's corn patch before he'll get back to yours. But don't bait the trap with corn. The thing that the raccoons like is fried chicken. So you can eat the chicken off the bones, put those fried chicken bones in the trap, and you'll catch all the raccoons all throughout your garden. Question from Cedar Rapids. Why does my compost pile smell? Phew. I think what you're doing is putting nothing but organic matter in. You've got to make a sandwich type of thing between every 6 or 8 inch layer of leaves or weeds. Add a couple of inches of soil. I think that'll take care of it. Well, that's all I have time for today. Next week, we're going to plant some pansy seeds. I'm going to talk about watering gadgets and techniques. And I'm going to tell you how to leave your houseplants at home while you go on vacation and find them alive and thriving when you get back home again. I'm Jim Crockett in Crockett's Victory Garden, and I hope you enjoy the program every week. I also wish that you could share some of this corn that Gary and I are going to have right now. Gary, let's test this corn.